You know, Lucky, I said softly, scratching behind his ears. This used to be our special place, remember? All three of us. His tail wagged gently, as if he understood. Of course he did. Lucky had always been too smart for his own good. The pasta was nothing fancy, just $20 for a decent portion that would be my lunch and dinner. My freelance graphic design work had been slow lately, but Giuseppe always gave me extra cheese when he thought I wasn't looking. Small kindnesses like that kept me going these days. I was just taking another bite when the familiar click-clack of designer heels approached. My stomach dropped before I even looked up. Those weren't just any heels. They were Louboutin, probably worth more than my rent. Only one person I knew wore shoes that expensive to intimidate people like me. Well. Look what the cat dragged in. Mila stood there in all her beta glory, her perfectly styled black hair catching the light, wearing a pristine white designer dress that probably cost more than I made in 3 months. 2 large men in black suits flanked her, bodyguards, because apparently even a casual Sunday stroll required an entourage when you were the general's daughter. I set down my fork carefully, my appetite suddenly gone. Mila. That's Miss Mila to you, Omega. Her voice dripped with disdain. I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here. Shouldn't you be hiding in whatever pathetic little apartment you crawl home to? Lucky's ears perked up, sensing the tension. He sat up straighter, those intelligent eyes now focused entirely on Mila. I placed a gentle hand on his head. Easy, boy. Mila's perfectly glossed lips curved into a cruel smile. Oh, that's right. You still have that thing. David's little charity project. Tell me, does it remind you every day of what you lost? What you'll never have again? My chest tightened. 3 months. It had been 3 months since David had to break up with me for this arranged engagement. 3 months since my world fell apart. And Lucky, sweet, loyal Lucky, was indeed my last connection to the man I still loved with every fiber of my being. Lucky isn't a thing, I said quietly, my hand still resting on his warm fur. And he's not a charity project. Isn't he, though? Mila stepped closer, her bodyguards moving with her. Just like you weren't. David told me all about how he felt sorry for you. A poor little Omega with dreams too big for his station. Did you really think someone like him could love someone like you? The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to cut deep. I'd heard variations of them before, whispered behind my back at social events David used to take me to. But hearing them now, spoken with such casual cruelty, made my throat burn. David and you were nothing, she interrupted. A temporary amusement. A phase. And now he's with someone appropriate. Someone worthy of his status. Before I could respond, she grabbed the glass of water from my table, the same glass I'd been drinking from, and without warning, poured the entire contents over my head. The cold water soaked through my simple button-down shirt and dripped from my hair onto the sidewalk. Gasps echoed from nearby tables as other diners turned to stare. I sat there, frozen in shock and humiliation, water dripping from my chin. Look at you, poor little Omega, Mila said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. Do you remember where you belong now? That's when Lucky snapped. My gentle, intelligent boy launched himself at Mila with a protective growl I'd never heard from him before. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the uneven sidewalk. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her white dress flying up as she hit the ground hard, her expensive purse scattering its contents across the dirty pavement. The fall revealed more than she'd intended, her white lace underwear now visible to everyone on the busy street. Smartphones appeared instantly, people recording and already starting to post on social media. I could practically see the headlines forming. General's daughter takes a tumble. Lucky, come here. I called urgently, but he stood protectively in front of me, his tail rigid, still focused on the threat to his human. Get this animal away from me. Mila shrieked from the ground, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, her white dress stained with street dirt. That's when I heard the voice that still haunted my dreams. Mila, what happened? David appeared as if from nowhere, rushed and concerned, his black hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running. He was still devastatingly handsome. Those deep brown eyes, the strong jawline, the way he moved with confident grace even when worried. My heart clenched painfully at the sight of him. He helped Mila to her feet, his hands gentle but his movements mechanical, like he was going through the motions of caring. But when his eyes found mine across the chaos, everything else seemed to fade away. Those warm brown eyes that had once looked at me with such love now held something I couldn't quite name. Longing? Regret. Lucky, he whispered, and my dog's tail began to wag hesitantly. You still remember me, don't you, boy? And in that moment, watching the man I'd never stopped loving recognize the dog we'd raised together, I knew that despite everything that had happened, despite the engagement and the cruel words and the impossible circumstances, something between us was still very much alive. The notification sound on my phone had been going off nonstop for the past hour. I'd turned off the volume after the 50th ping, but the screen kept lighting up with alerts from every social media platform I had. I stared at the trending hashtag General's Daughter Falls. The video was everywhere. Someone had caught the entire incident at Giuseppe's from 3 different angles, and now millions of people were watching Mila's pristine white dress flip up as she tumbled to the ground. The comments were brutal, some defending her, others laughing at what they called karma in designer heels. A few even praised Lucky for being a good boy protecting his human. I should have felt satisfied. After all the humiliation she'd put me through, seeing Mila become the laughingstock of social media should have been sweet revenge. Instead, I felt sick to my stomach. This is bad, Lucky, I murmured, stroking his head as he lay beside me on my small couch. Really bad. As if on cue, my phone rang. Unknown number. Amin. The voice was professional, cold. This is Marcus Chun from Chun & Associates. I'm calling regarding the logo design project we discussed last week. My heart lifted slightly. Finally, some good news. Yes, Mr. Chun. I've been working on the concepts you requested. I should have the initial drafts ready by. I'm afraid we've decided to go with another designer, he interrupted. We appreciate your time, but we're looking for someone with a different profile. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, confusion mixing with a growing sense of dread. That was the 3rd client this week who'd suddenly changed their minds. All of them had been enthusiastic about my work just days ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, a fellow freelancer I sometimes collaborated with. Amin, I heard about what happened. Be careful. Word is spreading that Mila's people are blacklisting anyone who works with you. My blood ran cold. Of course. Mila wasn't just the general's daughter for show. She had real power, real influence. And now I'd embarrassed her in front of the entire internet. The next few days passed in a blur of canceled projects and rejected proposals. Clients who had been eager to work with me suddenly stopped returning my calls. New potential clients would schedule meetings and then cancel at the last minute. My carefully built reputation as a reliable graphic designer was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do about it. By Thursday, my savings account balance made for depressing reading. I had enough for maybe 2 weeks of rent and groceries if I stretched every dollar. I was sitting at my laptop, desperately sending out portfolio samples to anyone who might listen, when my email chimed with a new message. Subject: Urgent Design Project, Stellar Innovations Incorporated. I'd never heard of Stellar Innovations, but at this point, I wasn't being picky. The email was professional, offering decent pay for a corporate rebranding project with a tight deadline. They wanted modern, clean designs for a construction-adjacent business. The contact person signed off as S. Miller, Creative Director. It felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. I replied immediately, attaching my portfolio and expressing my enthusiasm for the project. Within an hour, they responded with a contract and a down payment that would cover my rent for the next month. Over the following weeks, Stellar Innovations became my saving grace. They sent me project after project, logo designs, marketing materials, website graphics. The work was challenging and well-paid, and S. Miller was always professional and encouraging in their feedback. Your work captures exactly what we're looking for, one email read. Clean, sophisticated, with an emotional depth that really speaks to our brand values. It was the first positive feedback I'd received in weeks, and I found myself working with more passion than I had in months. Lucky seemed to sense my improved mood, spending his days curled up beside my desk as I worked, occasionally lifting his head to watch me with those intelligent eyes. I was just finishing up a particularly complex logo design when my doorbell rang. Lucky's ears perked up immediately, and he trotted to the door with an excitement I hadn't seen in weeks. Through the peephole, I saw David standing in the hallway, looking nervously at his phone. He was wearing casual clothes, jeans and a navy sweater that I remembered buying for him last Christmas. My heart did that familiar painful skip it always did when I saw him. I hesitated. Seeing him at the restaurant had been hard enough, but having him here, in the space that had once been ours, felt like opening a wound that had barely begun to heal. Lucky whined softly at the door, his tail wagging. I opened it. David, what are you doing here? He looked up from his phone, and those brown eyes were filled with concern. It's Lucky, he said quickly. I think he's sick. He's been different lately. Quieter. Not eating as much. I thought maybe he misses you. I looked down at Lucky, who was now practically vibrating with excitement at seeing David. His tail wagged so hard his whole body wiggled, and he kept looking between us as if expecting us to magically fix whatever invisible problem was keeping us apart. He seems fine to me, I said carefully, though my heart was already melting at the worry in David's voice. Could I come in? Just to check on him? I know this is awkward, but he's our dog, and I'm worried. Our dog. The words hit me like a physical touch. Despite every rational thought telling me this was a terrible idea, I stepped aside and let David into my apartment and back into my life. The familiar scent of David's cologne filled my small apartment as he knelt beside Lucky, running gentle hands over the dog's golden fur. It was the same careful way he'd always examined Lucky during our time together. Methodical, loving, like he was checking every inch for problems. When did you first notice something was wrong? David asked, his voice soft with genuine concern. I sat cross-legged on the floor beside them, trying to ignore how natural this felt. The three of us together again, even under these circumstances. Yesterday morning. He barely touched his breakfast, and he's been, well, having some digestive issues. Lucky looked perfectly content between us, his tail giving lazy wags as he soaked up the attention from both his humans. If anything, he seemed more energetic than he'd been in weeks. Maybe it's stress, David murmured, scratching behind Lucky's ears in that specific spot that always made the dog's eyes close in bliss. Dogs pick up on their humans' emotions. He probably senses that you've been having a hard time lately. There was something in his tone, a weight behind the words that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. I studied his profile as he continued his gentle examination of Lucky, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders seemed to carry invisible burdens. David, I said carefully, how did you know to find me here? He paused, his hands stilling on Lucky's fur. I've been keeping track. Making sure you were okay. Keeping track. The contract's getting canceled. The client's suddenly dropping you. His voice was quiet, almost ashamed. I know what Mila's been doing. My chest tightened. And you're just letting her? I'm trying to fix it, he said quickly, finally looking at me directly. Those brown eyes held pain I recognized. The same pain I saw in my own mirror every morning. The Stellar Innovations contracts. That's me. Miller is my middle name and my mother's maiden name. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Your Stellar Innovations? I couldn't let her destroy your career. Not because of me. Not because of what we. He trailed off, then tried again. I set up the company to funnel work to you. Good work, real projects. I wasn't trying to give you charity. Your designs are brilliant. But I couldn't sit back and watch her tear apart everything you'd built. I stared at him, emotions warring in my chest. Gratitude mixed with anger, relief tangled with hurt. So all this time, I thought I was finally getting back on my feet, but it was just you taking pity on me? It's not pity, David said firmly. It's, what? Love. The word came out sharper than I intended. Because you have a funny way of showing it, David. Engaged to another person, letting her humiliate me, and then sneaking around behind her back to throw me scraps of work. Lucky whined softly, sensing the tension rising between us. He nudged his head against my hand, then against David's, as if trying to bridge the growing distance. David's shoulders slumped. You're right. I've handled everything wrong. But Amin, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted, standing up abruptly. Lucky scrambled to his feet, alarmed by the sudden movement. We're over, David. You have Mila now. You made your choice when you agreed to that engagement. I never loved her. The words came out like a confession torn from his soul. I was forced into this, and you know that. My company, my family's legacy, everything was on the line. The general threatened to destroy us if I didn't marry Mila. But you did it anyway. I thought I could protect you by letting you go. I thought if I stepped back, she'd leave you alone. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from late nights when he was stressed about work. I never imagined she'd come after you like this. I wanted to stay angry. It would be easier, cleaner. But the pain in his voice matched the ache that had been living in my chest for 3 months. It doesn't matter, I said quietly. You're still engaged to her. Amin. He stood too, and suddenly we were standing closer than we'd been since the day he broke up with me. I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell that cologne that still made my heart race. Every night, all I think about is you. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with longing and regret. Every night, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, I lie in bed and remember how you used to curl up against my chest. How you'd mumble in your sleep when you were having bad dreams, and I'd hold you tighter until they went away. How Lucky would sneak onto the bed, even though we told him not to, and you'd pretend to be asleep so you wouldn't have to make him move. My breath caught. Those memories were too precious, too painful. I remember the way you'd make coffee in the morning, humming while you worked because you thought I was still asleep. The way you'd light up when you finished a design you were proud of. The way you looked at me like I was worth something more than just my family name or my bank account. Lucky moved between us, pressing against both our legs as if trying to push us back together. David, stop, I whispered, but I couldn't step away. I dream about coming home to you, he continued. About Sunday mornings and terrible cooking experiments and arguments over what movie to watch. I dream about a future where none of this matters, where it's just us and Lucky and whatever life we want to build together. Tears stung my eyes. But it's not real. It can't be real. It could be, he said softly, if I'm brave enough to fight for it. Before I could respond, Lucky suddenly whined and trotted quickly toward his food bowl, then looked back at us expectantly. I think someone's feeling better, David said with a shaky laugh, the emotional intensity breaking slightly. I watched Lucky wag his tail and realized that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't been sick at all. Maybe he'd just found a way to bring his two favorite humans back together, even if only for a few hours. You orchestrated this whole thing, didn't you? I said to Lucky, who responded by wagging his tail harder. David smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in months. He always was too smart for his own good. The past 2 weeks had fallen into an unexpected rhythm. David would text me about Lucky. Sometimes he was acting strange. Other times he was refusing his favorite treats. And once memorably, he was staring out the window looking sad. Each excuse was more transparent than the last, but I found myself looking forward to these messages more than I cared to admit. Today was no different. My phone buzzed as I was reviewing the latest batch of designs for Stellar Innovations. For David, though we'd both been carefully avoiding acknowledging that fact directly. Lucky seems lethargic today. Could you come check on him? I'm worried it might be something serious this time. I smiled despite myself. Lucky had been many things during our visits, playful, energetic, mischievous, but lethargic wasn't one of them. On my way, I texted back. The walk to David's penthouse took 20 minutes from my apartment. I'd made this journey so many times during our relationship that my feet knew the way without conscious thought. The familiar marble lobby, the elevator that always played soft jazz, the hallway with expensive artwork that I'd once felt comfortable enough to critique. When David opened the door, Lucky bounded past him to greet me with his usual enthusiasm, tail wagging and whole body wiggling with joy. Definitely not lethargic. Wow, I said dryly, scratching behind Lucky's ears. He looks absolutely miserable. David had the grace to look sheepish. Okay, maybe I was being overly cautious. We settled on his living room floor with Lucky between us, just like we had at my apartment. It was becoming our thing, these stolen moments of normalcy where we could pretend the outside world didn't exist. How's the Stellar project coming along? David asked, his voice carefully casual. The creative director has excellent taste, I replied, matching his tone. Very specific vision, but trusting enough to let me interpret it creatively. Sounds like a good working relationship. The best I've had in a while. Lucky rolled onto his back, paws in the air, demanding belly rubs from both of us. We obliged, our hands occasionally brushing as we petted him. Each accidental touch sent electricity through me that I tried my best to ignore. Amin, David said softly, his fingers stilling on Lucky's fur. I need to tell you something. The serious tone in his voice made me look up. His brown eyes held an intensity that made my heart race. What is it? I've been thinking about what you said. About making choices. About fighting for what I want. He paused, seeming to gather courage. I think it's time I stopped being a coward. Before I could ask what he meant, the sound of heels clicking on marble echoed from the hallway. David's face went pale. She's early, he whispered, scrambling to his feet. Whose? The The front door opened with the sharp click of an expensive key turning in an expensive lock. Mila's voice carried into the living room, high and imperious. "David, darling, I thought we could discuss the wedding venue options over." Her words cut off abruptly as she appeared in the doorway and saw me sitting on her fiancé's floor with our dog. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What?" she said, her voice deadly quiet. "Is this?" I stood slowly, Lucky pressing against my legs as if sensing danger. I was just checking on Lucky. David was worried he might be. "Get out." Her eyes blazed with fury, fixed on me like I was something disgusting she'd found on her shoe. "Get out of my home right now." "Mila, please," David started, moving to stand between us. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," she screamed. "How long has this been going on? How long have you been sneaking around behind my back with this pathetic excuse for an omega?" The words hit like physical blows, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm leaving." "Yes, you are," Mila snarled. "And you're never coming back. David, if I ever see this creature near you again, there will be consequences." I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, Lucky whining as he followed. The last thing I heard before the elevator doors closed was David's voice, strained and desperate. "Mila, you don't understand." 3 days passed before the consequences she'd promised materialized. I was walking Lucky through the small park near my apartment when I saw the police cars. 2 officers approached us with grim expressions, and my stomach dropped before they even spoke. "Are you Amin Lowe?" the taller officer asked. "Yes. You're under arrest for assault." The world seemed to tilt. "I'm sorry, what?" "We have video evidence of you directing your animal to attack Miss Mila, causing bodily harm and public humiliation. You have the right to remain silent." The rest of their words faded into white noise as handcuffs clicked around my wrists. Lucky barked frantically as they led me away, his leash falling to the ground. A kind-looking elderly woman picked it up, promising to take him to the address on his tags, my apartment. The next few hours passed in a blur of fluorescent lights, paperwork, and a holding cell that smelled like disinfectant and despair. The charges were assault, public disturbance, and something about directing an animal to commit harmful acts. The viral video of Lucky jumping at Mila was their main evidence, and apparently, the general's influence had convinced someone that it constituted a serious crime. My one phone call went to a legal aid lawyer who sounded overworked and unenthusiastic. "With your record, well, your lack of record is good, but the victim's family connections, this could be complicated. Bail hearing tomorrow morning." I spent the night on a narrow bench, staring at the ceiling and wondering how my life had spiraled so completely out of control. The next morning, as I was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on my frame, I saw David sitting in the gallery. His face was haggard, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and his eyes held a desperate intensity that made my heart clench. During the brief hearing, the prosecutor argued that I was a flight risk and a danger to prominent members of society. My overworked lawyer mumbled something about community ties and steady employment. Then David stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to post bail for the defendant." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "David, I'm willing to take full responsibility for ensuring Mr. Lowe appears for all court proceedings." The prosecutor objected furiously, pointing out David's relationship to the alleged victim. But David's lawyer, apparently he'd brought his own legal team, argued convincingly about David's standing in the community and his ability to guarantee my appearance. Bail was set at an amount that made my head spin, but David paid it without hesitation. An hour later, I walked out of jail to find him waiting by his car, Lucky sitting patiently in the passenger seat. "How did you?" I started. "I've been here since yesterday," he said simply. "Lucky's been with me. I couldn't let you go through this alone." Looking at him, exhausted, worried, but determined, I realized something had fundamentally changed. The careful distance we'd been maintaining, the pretense that we were just co-parenting a dog, had crumbled completely. For the first time in months, David was fighting for me. The apartment felt different when I returned from jail. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, my laptop still open on the coffee table, Lucky's food bowl in its usual spot by the kitchen, but something fundamental had shifted. Maybe it was me. 24 hours in a cell had a way of putting things into perspective. David helped me settle back in, his presence both comforting and complicated. He moved around my small space with familiar ease, making tea without asking, checking that I had enough food in my refrigerator, treating me with the gentle care he'd always shown when I was hurt or upset. "I should go," he said finally, though neither of us moved toward the door. "Mila will be expecting me home, and after yesterday, she probably wants to destroy me even more completely," I finished. "I won't let that happen." His voice carried a determination I hadn't heard in months. "I'm done letting her control my life. Our life." Lucky sat between us on the couch, his intelligent eyes moving back and forth as if following our conversation. When David finally left, promising to call his lawyers first thing in the morning, Lucky walked to the door and whined softly. "I know, boy," I said, scratching behind his ears. "I miss him too." That evening, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I wrote in my diary. It was a habit I'd started in high school, a way to process emotions when they felt too big to contain. During my relationship with David, the entries had been filled with happiness, plans for our future, little observations about our daily life together. After the breakup, they'd become a way to survive the heartbreak. I curled up on my bed with the worn leather journal, Lucky sprawled beside me, and let the words flow. Day 127 since David ended us. I know I shouldn't count anymore, but the numbers feel important somehow, like keeping track of how long I can survive this. Today I was arrested because of Mila's lies. 24 hours ago, I thought the worst thing she could do was destroy my career. I was wrong. But seeing David at that courthouse, knowing he waited there all night, knowing he paid bail without hesitation, I think maybe I was wrong about other things too. I keep thinking about what he said, that every night he thinks about me. I want to believe him, but how can I? He chose his engagement over us. He chose his family's approval over love. Even if Mila forced his hand, he still chose the easy path. But then I remember the way he looked at me yesterday. Like I was something precious he thought he'd lost forever. Like maybe despite everything, some part of him still belongs to me the way all of me still belongs to him. Lucky has been acting strange since we got home. He keeps going to the door and whining, like he's waiting for something. Or someone. Maybe he can sense that everything is about to change. Dogs are smart that way. I wish I could go back and tell David the truth about that night 3 months ago. Tell him what really happened when Mila came to see me. I paused, pen hovering over the page. Even now, writing it down felt dangerous. But the truth had been burning inside me for so long. She told David I was cheating on him. She said she had proof, photos, messages, witnesses. All lies, but she was convincing. And then she told him I'd confessed to her that I was only with him for his money, that I was planning to leave him anyway once I'd gotten enough financial benefit from the relationship. The worst part, she made it sound believable. A poor Omega with a rich alpha boyfriend. Of course there would be suspicions about my motives. David never questioned it, never asked me for my side of the story. He just believed her. I was going to propose to him that weekend. I had the ring and everything. Nothing expensive, just a simple band I'd been saving for. Instead, I got a text message saying he couldn't see me anymore, that he knew the truth about why I was really with him. I never got to tell him that I loved him before I even knew his last name. I never got to explain that when I met him at that coffee shop and he introduced himself as just David, I fell for a man I thought was probably a struggling artist or a grad student. Money was never part of the equation for me. Love was. Maybe that's why this hurts so much. He believed I could be that shallow, that calculating. After 2 years together, he believed I was capable of that kind of deception. But today, when he looked at me in that courtroom, I think maybe he's starting to remember who I really am. I closed the diary and set it on my nightstand, emotionally exhausted. Lucky had been unusually restless during my writing, pacing around the bedroom and occasionally pawing at the journal. Now he jumped off the bed and stood by the bedroom door, tail wagging. "What is it, boy?" He barked once, sharp and insistent, then grabbed the diary in his mouth. Lucky no. "Drop it." But he was already racing toward the living room. I chased after him, watching in horror as he headed straight for the front door with my most private thoughts clenched between his teeth. "Lucky, come back here right now." He paused at the door, looked back at me with those intelligent brown eyes, and then did something that stopped my heart. He used his paw to turn the door handle, a trick David had taught him during one of his many attempts to prove Lucky was basically a human in a dog suit. The door swung open, and Lucky bolted into the hallway with my diary. I ran after him in my bare feet and pajamas, calling his name as he raced down the stairs and out of the building. Other tenants poked their heads out of their apartments, probably wondering why someone was chasing a golden retriever through the building at 9 p.m. while shouting about personal property theft. By the time I reached the street, Lucky was already 3 blocks away and running with purpose. He wasn't running randomly. He was heading in a very specific direction, toward David's penthouse. I stopped chasing and stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard and watching my dog disappear around a corner with 3 months' worth of my most private thoughts. Lucky had always been smart, but this felt like something more than intelligence. This felt like intervention. Back in my apartment, I sat on my couch and stared at my phone, wondering if I should call David to warn him. But what would I say? "Hi, my dog just stole my diary." The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Grand Hotel downtown. I stood in the back of the room, trying to blend in with the crowd of reporters and photographers who had gathered for what they thought was just another routine business announcement from one of the city's most prominent CEOs. David hadn't told them what this was really about. The invitation had simply stated that David, CEO of construction, would be making an important personal and professional announcement. The media had assumed it was about the upcoming wedding or perhaps a new business venture. They had no idea they were about to witness the systematic destruction of one of the most powerful families in the country. I watched David take the podium, looking every inch the successful businessman in his perfectly tailored navy suit. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands as he adjusted the microphone. This was the moment that would change everything, for him, for me, for all of us. "Thank you all for coming," David began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. "I've called this press conference to make several important announcements that will significantly impact both my personal life and my business relationships." Cameras flashed as reporters leaned forward, sensing something bigger than a routine corporate update. "First, I want to address the rumors and speculation about my engagement to Miss Mila." David's eyes briefly found mine in the crowd, drawing strength from the connection. "Effective immediately, I am ending that engagement. The relationship was entered into for business reasons rather than love, and I refuse to continue living a lie." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was already bigger news than anyone had expected. "Furthermore," David continued, his voice growing stronger, "I want to publicly declare my intention to marry the man I should never have let go, Amin Lowe, a talented graphic designer and the love of my life." The murmur became a roar. Cameras swiveled, searching the crowd, but I stayed hidden behind a pillar, my heart racing at hearing David claim me so publicly. "However," David said, raising his voice over the noise, "my announcement today goes far beyond personal matters. Over the past several months, I have uncovered evidence of serious criminal activity involving General and his network of associates." The room fell deadly silent. "I have documented evidence of illegal arms sales, misuse of military contracts, bribery of government officials, and money laundering operations spanning the past 5 years." David's voice was cold, professional now. "These crimes have cost taxpayers millions of dollars and compromised national security." He gestured to his assistant, who began distributing thick folders to the reporters. "You'll find copies of financial records, recorded conversations, and photographic evidence in the materials being distributed. I've also provided copies to the Attorney General's office, the FBI, and the Internal Affairs Division of the military." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed continuously, and I could see several people frantically typing on their phones, probably calling editors and government contacts. "The construction company will be cooperating fully with all investigations," David continued over the noise. "We will not be conducting any further business with military contractors pending the resolution of these matters." A reporter near the front stood up. "Mr. David, are you aware that these accusations could result in criminal charges against your former fiancé's father?" "I am," David replied calmly. "And I believe that justice must be served regardless of personal relationships or business consequences." Another reporter. "What prompted you to investigate the general?" David's jaw tightened slightly. When someone uses their power to hurt innocent people, it becomes necessary to examine just how far that corruption extends. The general and his daughter have used intimidation, blackmail, and abuse of authority to control and destroy lives. That ends today. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a news alert. I glanced down to see headlines already appearing. "Major corruption scandal rocks military and general under federal investigation." David was still taking questions when I noticed a commotion near the back of the room. Security personnel were escorting someone out, someone in a white designer dress who was screaming threats that were thankfully lost in the general chaos. Mila had tried to crash the press conference, and from the look of rage on her face as she was removed, she'd heard enough to understand that her world was falling apart. 20 minutes later, David wrapped up the conference and made his way through the crowd toward me. Reporters tried to follow, but his security team created a barrier, giving us a moment of relative privacy in the hallway outside the main room. "How do you feel?" I asked, studying his face for signs of regret or doubt. "Terrified," he admitted with a shaky laugh. "But free. For the first time in months, I feel free." His phone had been buzzing constantly since he left the podium. "My lawyers," he explained, glancing at the screen. "They're already fielding calls from federal investigators who want to schedule interviews. And your company? We'll survive. We have enough legitimate contracts and clean business relationships to weather this storm." He took my hand, right there in front of the lingering reporters and cameras. "Besides, I have more important things to focus on now." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind. By evening, every major news network was running the story. The general had been taken into custody for questioning, and several of his business associates had been arrested. Mila's social media accounts had been deactivated, and rumors were swirling that she'd fled the country. David and I sat in my apartment, watching the coverage with Lucky curled between us on the couch. The charges against me had been quietly dropped. Apparently, the prosecutor's office had decided they had bigger fish to fry than a trumped-up assault case involving a dog protecting his owner. "No going back now," I said softly, watching footage of the general being led away in handcuffs. "No going back," David agreed. "And I wouldn't want to even if I could." He turned to face me, those brown eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in months, hope. "We did it, Amin. We're free." For the first time in 3 months, I allowed myself to believe that we really were. 6 months had transformed our lives in ways I'd never imagined possible. I stood in the bathroom mirror of David's penthouse, our penthouse now, adjusting my bow tie for the 3rd time. My hands were trembling slightly, not from nerves about getting married, but from the overwhelming happiness that seemed to bubble up from somewhere deep in my chest every time I remembered that this day was actually happening. "You look perfect," David said from the doorway, though he was the one who took my breath away in his charcoal gray suit with a silver tie that matched my own outfit perfectly. "Stop fidgeting." "I can't help it," I laughed, turning to face him. 6 months ago, I was eating street food and getting arrested. Now I'm about to marry the man of my dreams in front of all our friends. It feels surreal. David stepped closer, reaching up to straighten my already perfect tie. "It feels real to me. Finally real." He was right. After months of legal proceedings, media attention, and the slow process of rebuilding our lives, this quiet Sunday afternoon felt like the most natural thing in the world. The general had been sentenced to 15 years in prison. Mila had fled to some non-extradition country with what remained of her trust fund, and David had successfully launched Innovations Construction, a company built on ethical practices and transparent business dealings. My freelance business had flourished too, partly thanks to the publicity from the scandal, but mostly because David's new company had connected me with a network of ethical businesses who valued good design and honest work. The Stellar Innovations contract had evolved into something real and legitimate, and I'd never been happier with my career. "The guests are starting to arrive," David said, glancing toward the living room where we could hear voices and laughter. "Sarah's setting up the flowers, and Marcus brought that fancy camera equipment he promised." We'd kept the wedding small, just 12 of our closest friends, the officiant, and of course Lucky. The living room had been transformed with white roses and fairy lights, creating an intimate space that felt infinitely more meaningful than any grand venue could have been. "Is the guest of honor ready?" I asked, grinning. As if summoned, Lucky trotted into the bathroom, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. He wore a custom-made silver bow tie that matched ours, attached to a small vest that made him look impossibly dignified. His golden fur had been freshly groomed, and he carried himself with the pride of a dog who knew he was the most important attendee at this particular party. "Look at you, handsome boy," I said, kneeling down to adjust his bow tie. "Ready to be the best man?" Lucky wagged his tail and gave a soft woof that sounded remarkably like agreement. The ceremony itself was perfect in its simplicity. Our friend Michael, who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this occasion, led us through vows we'd written ourselves. David's eyes never left mine as he promised to choose love over fear, to trust in us even when the world seemed determined to tear us apart, and to never again let anyone convince him that what we had wasn't real. When it was my turn, I looked into those brown eyes that had first captured my heart 4 years ago and promised to be his anchor in storms, his celebration in joy, and his partner in whatever adventures life had planned for us. I promise to love you not despite our struggles, but because of how we've chosen to face them together, I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I promise to trust in us, to fight for us, and to never stop believing that love really can conquer all obstacles. Lucky sat between us during the entire ceremony, his intelligent eyes moving back and forth as if he understood every word. When Michael pronounced us married, Lucky barked once in apparent approval before David and I kissed to the sound of our friends cheering. The reception was a joyful chaos of good food, terrible dancing, and friends who'd stood by us through everything. Sarah gave a speech about the most dramatic love story she'd ever witnessed, and Marcus shared embarrassing photos from our early dating days that somehow Lucky had managed to pose for in half of them. As the evening wound down and our friends began to leave, David and I found ourselves alone on the balcony, Lucky sprawled contentedly at our feet. The city sparkled below us, and I could hear the distant sound of traffic and life continuing on around us. No regrets, David asked softly, his arm around my waist as we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Only one, I said, and felt him tense slightly. I regret that it took us so long to get here. He relaxed, pressing a kiss to my temple. But we did get here. That's what matters. I looked down at Lucky, who had somehow managed to keep his bow tie perfectly straight throughout the entire day. He was dozing in the warm evening air, but his ears were still alert, always ready to spring into action if his humans needed him. Lucky, I said softly, kneeling down to stroke his golden head. His eyes opened immediately, focusing on me with that familiar intelligence. We know we'll never be separated again. None of us. His tail began to wag, a slow, contented rhythm that spoke of absolute happiness. He understood, just like he'd always understood. He'd brought us back together when we were too stubborn and scared to do it ourselves, and now he could rest easy knowing his pack was complete. Best wedding guest ever, David said, joining me on the floor to pet Lucky. Though I'm still not sure how he knew to steal your diary that night. Maybe some things are just meant to be, I replied, watching Lucky's tail wag harder as he soaked up attention from both his humans. Maybe he just knew that some love stories are worth fighting for. David took my hand, the new wedding ring catching the last rays of sunlight. Here's to love stories worth fighting for. And to the smartest dog in the world, I added. Lucky gave another soft woof of agreement, then settled back down between us, his head resting on David's leg and his paw stretched out to touch my knee. Perfect contentment radiated from his relaxed body as the three of us watched the sun set over our new beginning. For the first time in my life, everything felt exactly as it should be. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next video.